Hi, it's your scary fairy godmother. Before we venture into the fairy world together, I'd like to take a moment to thank all my supporters on Patreon and all those who have joined the channel or made a one-off donation. Your support helps enormously and will ultimately help me to make more and better videos more often. If you like this content and would like to become a monthly supporter, head over to my Patreon page at patreon.com/scaryfairygodmother. Or become an official channel member by clicking the join button under this video for only 99 cents. Links for support options can be found in the description. Thank you so much. Now, follow me into the fairy world. I grew up in rural Illinois. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, I saw something that stuck with me my entire life. It was about 8 in the morning and I was in bed just starting to wake up. I kept hearing tapping sounds coming from my closet. Didn't think much of it because we had a cat. I yelled, "Bridget," that's the cat's name, "knock it off," or "shut up," something to that effect. Here is where things got weird. My cat must have heard her name because she meowed, and she was in the hallway looking at me. She wasn't making the sound in the closet. So what the hell was it? When I looked, this was pretty much broad daylight, 8 in the morning, and the sun was shining straight through the window because it was facing east. I saw a 3-ish foot tall person? I say it as a question because this was not a person, just the general shape of one. It had a weird beak thing for a mouth. Instead of a normal mouth, it was the only way I can explain it, a crow's beak, but made of skin. I stared, not glanced, stared at this thing for about 10 seconds. I rubbed my eyes and thought, I've got to be dreaming. Then it lifted its arm and began tapping on this old life jacket I had hanging in the closet, as if to say, "Hey idiot, it's me doing it, not the cat." I also vividly remember the finger it was tapping with, very long and skinny, with long fingernails, really long fingernails that came to a sharp point. I ran out of the room at that point, screaming. I was not dreaming and had looked at this thing long enough to catch the details of what it looked like. No one really believed me at first. Then my sister had a sleepover and one of the girls went into that room. I don't know why, but she came out screaming. When she finally calmed down enough to talk, she said she saw a short, scary man. Her mom had to come pick her up around midnight because she refused to stay any longer. Then my sister, who had never had a problem with this before, started sleepwalking into that room, almost nightly. She told my mom that she would wake up and a short guy dressed like a pirate with big hands would be pointing and laughing at her. I saw a short guy dressed in animal skins, but I think I just got a better look and really saw him because I don't think he was really dressed as a pirate. My sister would run out of that room screaming about every other night. Eventually, my mom, to make us feel better, not believing us kids, went in the room with a crucifix and a Bible. She was doing this as a spectacle for us to see so we would no longer be afraid. So she goes in and comes out looking like she just saw a ghost. My sister and I basically said, "See? Something is in there." My mom didn't admit she had seen anything that day, but we knew something had happened. When I was older, I asked her again about that day, and she said she hadn't wanted to scare us at the time, but something slapped the Bible out of her hands and pushed her towards the door. To this day, when I visit, I sleep on the couch and will not go in that room. It could be in my mind, but something feels off when you go in there. I'm studying for a bachelor's of science, and I'm one of the most skeptical people I know. Still, I can't explain any of what that was. I tried telling myself I was dreaming or half asleep, but that doesn't explain the other 5 or so people who saw the same thing. I think something else lives in that room, and whatever it isn't human. This didn't happen to me, but to my sister in Norway in the 1990s. My sister was visiting an elderly lady who lived in what was said to be the oldest house in the area. It was over 170 years old. The lady my sister was visiting showed her into the lounge, which was a very pleasant and sunny room with windows on both sides. The elderly lady went off to make coffee, leaving my sister alone in the room. A movement in the doorway caught my sister's eye, and as she looked, she was amazed to see a diminutive figure dressed in leggings, a jacket, and a hat, which rose into a soft and floppy point. All the clothes were in bright colors, sky blue, fire engine red, and yellow, or maybe it was green, I can't remember the details. The figure had a face which my sister described as male, deeply tanned and wrinkled, and with bright and intelligent black button-like eyes. I don't remember if she mentioned a beard. The creature was not as tall as the back of the sofa it was standing next to, so I'm guessing it was less than 30 to 36 inches tall. The little man was studying my sister intently, but when he realized she had seen him, he quickly stepped behind the sofa, which was in front of my sister. The room had 2 sofas opposite each other with a large coffee table between them. There was at least 5 or 6 feet between each of the sofas and the wall behind. My sister rose from her sofa and walked around the coffee table to kneel on the second sofa so that she could see over the back of it to get a better look at the little person. But there was no one there, and she immediately looked under the sofa again. No one was there. It was at this point that her elderly host returned, bearing a tray of coffee and cakes. My sister was embarrassed, and her host asked her if she had dropped something. My sister didn't know how to reply truthfully, but the elderly lady smiled and said something like, "So you have met my little gnome." My sister's face must have told its own story. And the old lady said that in Scandinavian lore, many homes had a fairy protector, and described the figure in perfect detail to my sister. To have actually seen the little creature was said to be extremely rare, and my sister was considered to be very honored because of it, according to her host. Even after the event, she still didn't believe what she had seen, despite her host's confirmation that she had had a real experience and not imagined the whole thing. My sister was always a practical person, not given to flights of fancy or telling tales. So I have every reason to believe her account was a true representation of what she believed she had experienced. When I was a kid, the guest room in our house always made me feel uneasy. It was big and dark, and I felt a little creeped out when I went in there to play. Around this time, I had recently watched the movie The Princess and the Goblin. If you haven't seen it, there's a part where a boy sings a song to scare away a bunch of goblins. So I got it in my 5-year-old head that if I sang in the guest room, the monster that lived in there would be scared away. So, early one morning while my parents were getting ready for work, I stood outside the guest room and started to sing. It started off as a game, but after a few seconds of singing, I was shocked to actually see what I believed were monsters come floating from the guest room. They were just eyes, kind of like brightly colored outlines. I remember that they cast clear shadows against the wall. That was what convinced me that they were real and solid. I watched in disbelief as dozens of these things came floating out of the guest room, all of them glaring at me, and then streamed downstairs and out the front door. I didn't stop singing until the flow of them slowed down to a trickle. I remember afterwards I asked my family members if they saw the things, but no one else had seen them, except my little sister, and she was too young to be surprised by them or understand why I was so freaked out. I never got an explanation for what I saw. My next story happened in the same house when I was a teenager. It was October of 2009. I was on my way out to go walk a neighbor's dog. It was dark out, and at this time I never went out without a flashlight. Ever. I always grabbed one and tested it to make sure it had plenty of battery life if I was going out after dark. I usually left the house through the basement. The basement was unfinished and very dimly lit. There was a glass door in the back that opened to a small pen enclosed by a fence. As I walked by the doors, I noticed two very bright, golden eyes looking in. The eyes were cat-like, with long slit pupils. I remember that they glowed bright gold, and they were darting around as if looking around the basement like whatever it was very interested and curious about what it was seeing. I figured a cat had somehow gotten into the pen and was sitting at the door, so I pointed my flashlight at the glass door and flicked it on. The eyes disappeared. I saw nothing at all, just the empty pen all the way back to the fence. The pen was completely empty. I was confused and a little spooked. I turned off my flashlight. The second I turned off the light, the eyes were back, exactly where they'd been a moment before, bright and golden in the dark glass. But now, they were focused intently on me. I still get chills thinking about it. Something about the way that they were staring at me scared me out of my mind. I screamed and sprinted up the basement stairs. I heard years later that spirits like to look in windows at night. It makes me wonder exactly what I saw that night and why it was so interested in my house and me. I've occasionally experienced night terrors. For anyone who hasn't experienced them before, I'll try to explain them the best I can. Night terrors, or sleep paralysis, are when you're asleep but vividly dreaming that you're awake, right where you are, in your bed or wherever you happen to be. And you can see as you would normally when awake, with lighting exactly as it is at the time you are having the dream. So if it's dawn, the dawn light is realistically pouring into the room in your dream. If it's dark in your room with just the moonlight streaming in, that's how it appears in your dream. It's as though you can see your surroundings through your closed eyelids, which at the time you think are open. During this experience, you are completely paralyzed. So if something happens to you, something terrifying, your paralysis prevents you from being able to escape it, fight it, or even cry out for help. These terrifying experiences feel real. If someone in your dream touches you or attacks you, you feel them touching you, striking you, strangling you. If they're on top of you, you feel their weight crushing you. The moment you try to scream or call out is normally the moment where your eyes open for real. You regain the ability to move and you realize the terrifying experience wasn't real. The few night terrors I have involved shadow people. All but one, but I'll get to that intriguing experience later. I used to live in a maisonette above a chip shop, so occasionally I would pop downstairs and get myself a cheap takeaway meal. In the early 2000s, just before I had become a full vegan, I decided to order a cheese pasty with my chips. I heartily partook of my thoroughly British slap-up meal and later that night went to bed, as you do, settling down to a sleep very quickly. No sooner had I sunk into a sound slumber than I saw it appear in my bedroom doorway. A solid black silhouette figure which appeared to be male, with no outline indicating any hair or clothes. It rapidly crept over to my bed, climbed onto it, onto me, and straddled my chest. I felt his painful weight crushing my rib cage, and without hesitation he placed his hand over my nose and mouth, suffocating me. I felt the pressure of his hand over my face and tried to struggle to breathe. I couldn't, nor would my voice emit from my throat as I tried to scream. Then I was finally able to force my eyes open, which I hadn't realized up until then had been closed, and with that, the creepy, predatory shadow man disappeared. I was wide awake, and it hit me that I had experienced a night terror. Anyway, I'm not sure how much later it was, maybe a few months, maybe almost a year. I was feeling particularly hungry one evening, so came to the decision once again to treat myself to a generous portion of chips and a hot cheese pasty from the chip shop downstairs. As disgusting as it might sound, I once again enjoyed the deep-fried, hot, cheese-filled pasty, and as usual, settled down to sleep in bed later that night. And guess what? It happened again. The exact same shadowy figure, the exact same attack, the smothering, my inability to breathe, fight, or struggle free, and my only waking up once my persistence to emit a scream woke me and made him vanish. Noticing a pattern, I decided to never again partake of any more of those evil pasties, or any form of hot melted cheese for that matter, and this also probably contributed to my current lifestyle choice of veganism. The cheese pasty man has not visited me since. Fast forward to a couple of months ago. In a different home and different part of the country where I currently reside, I was lying in bed having trouble sleeping, but managed to nod off in the early hours of the morning. No sooner had I slipped into snooze land than something or someone appeared in my open bedroom doorway. A tall, thin, dark silhouetted male figure, the only illumination coming from the switched-on hallway light behind him. He stood in profile with his head hanging forward, chin against his chest, as though he had some kind of abnormal spine curvature. Although he was just a silhouette with no visible facial features, I could see him leering at me. This figure had the clear outline of someone well-dressed, in smart trousers and possibly a tailcoat, or maybe a lab coat. Then, as he stood there, I felt and saw another figure climb onto my bed and straddle my torso. This jet-black figure appeared to be a small woman with jagged, sharp features. Her chin was pointed and her hair piled in an angular, jagged form on top of her head into a slanted point. Feeling her weight on top of me as she leaned forward so that her head was right next to mine, her mouth next to my left ear as my paralyzed head was involuntarily turned towards the figure in the doorway. I heard her speak. In a European accent with rolled R's, feeling her breath in my ear as she spoke, she eerily said in the most sinister tone, "The master has got impatient for you. That's the problem with such a long procedure." if that wasn't heart-stoppingly creepy enough, as she spoke, I felt her scrape sharp, pointed, probably 7 or 8 inch long fingernails, which protruded from her index fingers, across my chest. Thanks to my previous unpleasant experiences, I knew what was going on. Through the paralysis, I fought to turn my head towards hers and force my voice out from the restraint of my paralyzed throat. Finally succeeding, I called out, "I know you're not real!" And with that, both figures completely disappeared, and my eyes opened for real as I regained the ability to move. Now, those were typically scary night terrors, and from my research, I have found that the appearance of shadow people and sinister characters putting their weight onto the dreamer's chest in order to suffocate them are quite common. Why these figures so often creep into the unconscious of their victims and why they attack them with similar ways remains a mystery. But even more bafflingly mysterious was an experience I had during sleep paralysis around 3 to 4 years ago. Different home, different bedroom again. Late one night in my bed, I began to nod off with my phone. I had just drifted off when I felt someone from beside my bed tuck in my covers. Through my calm sleep, I felt the covers tighten over my body. I then felt the tickle of gentle fingertips affectionately stroke my hair behind my ear. And then I felt my phone being gently removed from my now relaxed grip, and the subtle weight of it being rested on the mattress next to my pillow. I wasn't scared that there was someone in my room because I could feel the love and affection behind the gestures. But no sooner had my phone been placed on my mattress than my eyes opened to find my phone still in my hand and no one else in the room. I realized I had had a nice night terror. Throughout the great amount of research I have carried out on this phenomenon, I am yet to discover anyone else who claims to have had such a pleasant experience during sleep paralysis. The only other difference during my not-so-terrible terror was that this time my eyes were closed, as in I couldn't see whatever or whoever was apparently taking care of me while I slept. Could it have been a good shadow person who didn't want to scare me with their appearance? Or something entirely different? I guess I'll never know. But I'd much prefer that they visit me instead of the other creeps who have intruded upon my half-dreaming, half-awake state. But it makes me wonder, could there be more to night terrors than some weird subconscious phenomenon? Could it be that there are real beings that exist in that place between sleep and awake, and that, like humans, some of them are good and some of them are evil? I have always heard that fairies inhabit another dimension. I wonder if our dreams could be one way for us to access that place, or a way for those creatures that live there to get access to us. For context, I'm a 24-year-old man, and I had this dream shortly after having graduated high school. My family and I were at an old abandoned house, just exploring through it. I think I was in a well-beaten basement when the place came to life suddenly, with laughter, lights, and smiling people. These people all appeared to be quite elderly, and I honestly felt like I'd been thrown back to the 40s based on their clothing and the furniture. They all were just having the time of their lives. I can't remember any music playing, but they all seemed to be dancing to something. I was making my way up the beautifully decorated stairs to the main floor, just absorbing the whole place and enjoying the inviting environment, when we suddenly had to leave. I got the sense that we'd all been there for quite a while, despite only seeing a few things. And as we were leaving, a jolly man who was sitting in a cozy chair next to the front door handed me a gift-wrapped box. He insisted I take the box with me. He seemed incredibly happy about it. Upon being handed the box, I got incredibly emotional, even now typing this, and said to him, "Thank you, but I don't think I can take this with me where I'm going." But he kept smiling as though he couldn't understand me and kept insisting we take the box. My family and I left the jolly house in tears. To this day, I have no idea why that dream makes me so emotional. Listening to these stories on your channel, I wonder if these elderly people were some kind of benevolent, partying fairies. In the 1990s, I lived in a very old house in Wales. I don't know how old it was, but it had an untouched energy, pre-modernization. While living there, I tried to use candles and hardly watch TV, instead playing soft music or talking with friends. It seemed like the house preferred it that way somehow. I was interested in spirituality and the paranormal, and sometimes I would hold gatherings of like-minded friends, and at times seances in the house. We all noticed it was quite a hot spot of activity. There were a lot of experiences by myself and others at the time. One experience in particular stands out. A friend and I were at home one evening relaxing in the lounge. My dog was out in the front garden. It was late autumn. We had candles lit, listening to music, discussing religion and spirituality as we often did. As we chatted, we heard my dog, a spaniel, scratching at the front door to come in. My friend went into the hall to let the dog in, leaving the lounge door open. I was sitting in my chair and could clearly see 2 meters or so out into the hall. That's when I heard a commotion, like an animal's feet running. I looked out into the hall, expecting to see Ben, my spaniel, come running into the room. But instead, I saw a man-sized, animal-like creature run past the lounge and then up the stairs. I heard the heavy sound of it running on all 4s as it shot up the stairs. It was, I'd say, if standing, 5'5", maybe more. It looked sort of like a human crossed with an animal. I could see brownish, leathery, tough skin with coarse black hair sporadically growing out of its body. Its head had a large, flattened snout, crinkled and wrinkled like someone had forced its nose into its face, and upward protruding teeth like big fangs from its bottom jaw, giving the face an ugly, quite fierce expression. Its eyes were red and seemed to glow. Alarmed, I got up and tried to figure out what I had seen. It definitely wasn't my dog, as he had not come in and was still out in the garden. I shouted to my friend, who told me she had heard whatever it was, but curiously did not see it, despite the fact that it should have run right past her given where she was standing. I went upstairs to look around, but found nothing unusual. Over the next few years, I and visitors to the house would sometimes see red lights, like eyes, at night, up on the landing or on the stairs, and on a few occasions hear something running up the stairs, like a very large dog. I'm convinced it was a fairy, a puka, or some other thing. The house got renovated and modernized in later years, and all these occurrences stopped. This happened at my home in Scotland. At the time, my husband and I were both in our 50s. I had always been a bit of a believer and became more so due to this incident. On a summer evening at dusk, My husband and I were sitting in the garden, pondering the jungle of bushes and flowers and weeds we were planning to transform and tackle in the coming week. We had just moved into this house, and the garden was a tangled, unsightly mess. We had been sitting in silence, surveying the mess, when I thought I could see a kind of sparkling effect amongst the tangled weeds. I tried to point this out to my husband, who did not see this. However, within the next few minutes, what had been a tangled mess of weeds was, to me anyway, suddenly transformed into what I can only describe as a perfect garden, glowing and beautiful. I thought that perhaps I was seeing things, so I didn't mention it immediately to my husband. But then he nudged me and said, Look at the garden!" He saw it too. I couldn't believe it. Then he turned and looked at me and he said, "Oh my God, your face. You look like a teenager." He held my face and stared at me in amazement. Of course, I jumped up and dived into the house to find a mirror. But when I did, my face looked the same as always. My husband said that as I ran inside, the garden went back to normal. All around the garden are old stones built into short walls. In later years, I found out where the stones had come from. Near where I live, there is what was once a grand estate and is now a public woodland and glen with a ruined castle. Near the site of the castle, there was once a stone-built fairy well. People would sample the mineral waters of the well and make wishes. However, the well was reduced to rubble in a landslide in the 1960s. At that time, local people helped themselves to the old stones for use as garden walls and edgings, that kind of thing. And, as you may have guessed, my garden is full of these stones. I believe that what my husband and I experienced that evening was what is called in Scottish lore, the glamour. That's an ability the fairies are said to have to change the appearance of things, so that dead leaves look like gold coins, or handfuls of mud look like baked pies, or old and abandoned things look new again. It was an incredible experience, but unnerving too. I guess that's just the way of the fairies. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed those stories, and I hope everyone is staying healthy and safe during this time. I wish everyone the best. Let me know your thoughts on the stories in the video, and if you have any requests for topics for future videos down in the comments. What sort of fairy stories do you want to hear in the future, and what topics would you like me to cover? I'll be in the comments responding to your questions and comments for the next hour or so. As always, special thanks goes out to all my supporters on Patreon. Thank you guys so much for the support you are giving this work. If you like this content and would like to support it, please check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description. You can also join the channel for 99 cents by clicking the join button. The stories in this video came courtesy of subscribers and the Fairy Census. Thank you to everyone who submitted. Some of the stories from the census were edited to make them more friendly for narration, but if you want to read the originals, the link to the census is in the description, as well as the numbers of all the stories, so you can look them up. I'm always collecting your true fairy encounter stories, so if you've got one, please send it along. I'd love to read it. My email is in the description. That goes for fairy art as well. If you have any to share, please email it to me with fairy art in the subject line, and I will share the art on my social media channels. Don't forget to comment below, like, share, and subscribe if you're new, and hit the bell to receive notifications. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.